Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the final week of 2024's edition of June on the Range, a terrific BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate Westerns, which once upon a time needed no boosting for a long time, for 30 or 40 years, at least. In the American publishing world, they needed no boosting. They were the most popular kind of thing that you could do, aside from romance. The convenient fact that Dude Bros always leave out here is that from the beginning of print press publishing, romances have sold better than anything. But we'll leave that aside. We have Sarah at the Book of Schnitter for romance, so we don't need to worry about it. We'll concentrate on Westerns, which once upon a time were the surefire ticket. If you were a hack author and you had a manual typewriter, you could make a living writing Westerns. And if you were a lazy reader, a bored reader, a pleasure-seeking reader, who only wanted pleasure, not is anything wrong with that at all, well, then you could get your fill with Westerns. They were everywhere. And that changed. And I don't know that all the great minds together at June on the Range over the years have quite figured out why that changed. I myself have never figured out why that changed. I've heard a whole bunch of interesting theories from all of you. But it did change. And you don't have that as an active part of the publishing world anymore. There's a Books A Million up in Vermont that has a Western section in their bookstore. Aside from that, I can't remember the last time I've seen a retail bookstore that had a Western section. There aren't enough of them being published. It would all be backstock. But some authors do keep writing. And they write the two different kinds of Westerns that we have encountered in June on the Range, the serious and the not so serious. And by serious here, I don't mean anything snobbish. I just mean that some authors are trying to write a richly textured, nuanced book, while others are writing the 50th book in a series about a character who manages to bed the local saloon wench in every town and who has, they're 120 pages long. They're meant to be snacks. They're meant to be just a little fistful of trail mix, and that's all. Both of those things were published in profusion in the 1940s and the 1950s and even into the 1960s. And both of them are still published, but not so much anymore. And I read recently, for June on the Range, I read an example of a so-called serious, more or less contemporary, I think it was 20 years old, more or less contemporary serious Western. So not any of the 25 or 35 cent paperbacks that I bought all year long that are in a stack being neglected out in the kitchen. I should be reading those because I bought them to read in this event. So maybe for this last week I will. But for last night I went to an ebook. And I read once again another relatively contemporary Western. This is about 20 years old. And it's by an author that I hadn't read before. It's Once a Renegade by Peter Brandvold. And I guess it's part of a series. I didn't realize that until I was well along, and I started to get the sense that hints were being dropped here and that this was... then I went and looked. Then I went online and looked. This is about Sheriff Ben Stillman. And this is... I don't quite remember which book it is in the series. Notice it's absolutely missing from the cover of the book. You are not meant to think that this is book number 5 or 6 in the series, even though it is. I think probably the author insisted on that because the author is writing books that stand alone, and this stood alone. I got the sense that I was coming into characters, the sheriff and his deputy, Leon. I got the sense that I was coming into characters that already had an existence elsewhere, but I think that sense in me is probably a little more heightened than the normal reader, since I read for a living, and have for a long time. I think a normal reader would think this is just a story. I didn't know that there were any earlier books. If you didn't know, you wouldn't. The book won't make you feel that way, which is great. That's exactly how this should be done. If you're writing book 6 in any kind of series, that's exactly how things should be done. And here we have a fairly straightforward plot. There's a group of men. They are armed. They are boisterous. They are brutish. They josh with each other, but they seem crude. And one of them receives mockery from the other two because he has long flowing hair that he takes assiduous care of. And he says why. He says that the reason why is because it gets him romantic action in town. Far more than his compadres do. And they come across a beaver trapper named Shambo, who is a Métis Indian. And they kill his mule. more or less out of sadism. They don't have a reason to do it. They just do it. And the animal was a friend of Chambeau, and he decides that he will respond by upping the ante. So he scalps the guy who has the long hair. Now, I know that the term, oh, you know, are you going to scalp, or the Indians say, or I've taken a scalp, or something like that. We call illicit sports ticket sellers scalpers. I know that term is common parlance, and it may blunt the reality of what it was like. Scalping actually did happen. It was every bit as prevalent on the white-skinned Western American side of any conflict as it was on the red-skinned American Indian Native American side. It was common on both sides. And of course, statistics are impossible to obtain, but I get the strong impression, reading history, that it was mostly done on people who didn't die, that they didn't die of it. It was grotesque, absolutely grotesque, especially when it was done at elaborate length. And this book, Peter Brandvold, I think this is the first time I've ever read this author. He has a very odd tone to him, very different from Charles West, very different, far more savage, far more violent and bloody, and maybe a little bit less sympathetic. Either he's less sympathetic in his general philosophy of writing, or he's just less of a writer. I didn't quite pinpoint it, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it was a bit unsavory. This is an unsavory kind of novel. I know who I'm supposed to root for, because Sheriff Stillman is instructed to hunt down Chambeau, and it isn't long before he knows that all of his sympathies are more in line with the man he's hunting than with any of the people that this man hurt. So I know that there are moral, emotional elements involved here. Do you want to get down? There you go. You want to go over there to your chair? There you go. All right, okay. That little melodrama's over. I know all of those things, but I didn't care. I guess, and I didn't care because of the way the author writes this. So maybe this is just not an author for me. Certainly when I was done with this book, I predicted how it would end about halfway through the book. None of my predictions were wrong. And when I got to the end of the book, the last thing I wanted to do was read another Ben Stillman adventure. I know there are others. I know there were some before this, including, I presume, a novel where he's introduced. I had no interest in doing that. I don't know, upon reflection and maybe rolled in together with subsequent authors that I will read this week, maybe that will change. I'm open to that. I know that this series, this author, is popular, but it didn't work on me. It didn't work on me at all. So that my report, once a Renegade, my report for June on the Range for last week is not all that good. I don't know if I'm going to rectify it, but I think that I am definitely going to go to those old paperbacks. I got them for a reason. I'll read them for the last week to read out June on the Range, and I know it's not the ebook's fault. It's just this plus the Charles West, the negative parts of the Charles West, that makes me think that maybe some key element is missing from these later westerns. These later romances, I said it again, westerns. These later westerns are a phenomenon. What is the phenomenon of writing a once popular genre when it's no longer popular? You'll see it. It'll happen all the time. But what is that? What is that phenomenon? And what kind of a thing does it do to the people who write it? I find those kinds of questions fascinating. I just not fascinating enough, I think, to read the books themselves. Maybe I'll finish up. Maybe in the middle of the week or something, I will read another later romance. I said it again. All right, this is a romance. I'm going to say romance from now on. So maybe in the middle of the week, I will find another later romance and read that, just to see how it counterbalances Charles West and Peter Brandvold. But for now, I'm going to go to the old 35-cent romances and read them instead. So I will go to that pile. I don't know what I'll pick, but that'll be going on the reading for tonight. And I will report back. We will see how my last week of June on the Range goes. Thank you, BookTube.